Hello and welcome back to this damn full idealistic crusade. In this video I'd like to go over the latest additions to my never-ending Laserdisc collection. And as any collector will tell you, in 2026, LDs pop up sporadically, so as usual things had gone pretty dry, and so I only had one pickup in the recent past that was worth going over in a video, but I try to wait until I have a couple discs before I do another video, otherwise I'd just be doing short videos on one or two discs at a time. So the lone disc I'd been able to pick up was a really nice condition copy of the Paramount Letterbox edition of White Christmas. And of course the reason why I really wanted to pick this up is it's the classic Paramount Letterbox cover design, but in red and white instead of black and white to fit the holiday theme. And it just looks really fantastic, even better in person when you manage to get a copy. This was in really nice shape and it was only $1.25. Plus, it still has the original Tower Records price stickers on it, which I haven't removed yet, but when they're vintage stickers, especially from a store like Tower Records, it's kind of cool to hang on to those somewhere. There's also a really fantastic gatefold loaded with stills and continuing the red letterbox effect. So everything about this is the usual Paramount affair in terms of jacket design, but given that extra bit of creativity. The rear also is in red and white, so it looks spiffier than usual, and you've got a number of nice stills. It's just the film only, although it does include the trailer for Funny Face, according to the chapter stops. Now, this was the product of a new restoration at the time, using a inner positive that had been generated and was in the Paramount vaults from the original VistaVision negative, and it does credit that they did new work on the soundtrack, mixing the original magnetic masters for the music and effects with the original optical track, resulting in a new stereo mix that I am curious to check out. And a lot of this work seems to have been the foundation for the various revisits to the film, as it did see a reissue on DVD and got spiffed up for the eventual Blu-ray, and then Paramount went back and did their 4K version for the UHD release. But with any Paramount title, it's nice to have various different editions and restorations to see what they've done over the years, because in terms of their modern restorations, they leave a lot to be desired with their revisionist practices. So I was just always curious about this release, but the jacket is really why I always wanted to get one, because it's one of my favorite cover designs in all of physical media, but a special holiday edition. I should also mention that this does have digital PCM sound. I believe it's stereo, but it might also be matrixed to recreate the original multi-channel effect, as VistaVision was not just a large format system, but it did allow for either multi-track stereo or, more often, Perspecta stereo. So that was it for my Laserdisc finds in terms of local stores. It had gone pretty dry, and I just cherry-picked that one disc out of a small box at a store sale. They only had one small box of LDs in the store. But then, all of a sudden, as any Laserdisc collector will know firsthand, just when you think things have completely dried up, all of a sudden you get lucky, or you see more Laserdiscs in a store combined than you've seen in years. Because the local store chain we have here actually had a collector trade in most of his collection. This was actually Ron Hall, who I know as a fellow Laserdisc collector in the area through some of the Facebook groups, and we've seen each other in the stores sometimes. Well, he had decided to get rid of the bulk of his collection and traded it in at the local Great Escape chain of stores. So all of a sudden, I saw the store furthest from me make a social media post that they had gotten in a ton of Laserdiscs, and they posted the first couple photos of what they'd put out. And then I put two and two together, and I saw the messages that it was indeed this collection that I knew of that had been parted out, and so I knew it would be interesting to dig through. What I didn't expect was that the prices would be quite low. For the most part, a good majority of the massive amount of Laserdiscs that had been put out were in the 99-cent range. I was toast. So I went to the store, and it actually took multiple trips because it took them a long time to go through and price everything. And so I had to actually make return visits, which also increased the temptation to pick up more cheap laser discs. And it was difficult to not just want to purchase everything, but I also have to try to think about space concerns, and I try to budget my physical media spending every month. And so I tried to focus on titles that I had been looking for that were in good shape, or things that I could use in my never ending transfer research. So that's why I always prioritize discs with digital soundtracks. So I was just focusing primarily on the 99 cent or under titles, but there were tons of box sets and special collections, Pioneer special editions, also a number of DTS discs, but the store was pretty much aware of the value of DTS discs, so they were pretty much eBay prices, which is to be expected. But then there were a few oddities here and there where the pricing was more than a bit extreme, not just things that were later releases, which obviously might carry a price premium because they're late releases, but there was also a number of sealed discs that were not expensive discs but had very high price tags on them. The one that got me most was a $35 sealed copy of the notorious Rodder version of Close Encounters, the special edition version that is pan and scanned. That's a notorious early 80s Rodder disc that's to be avoided, but because it was sealed, they thought it was more valuable. And ironically, this collection had the collector's edition of Close Encounters, the box set of the third cut of the film, which is a late release, hard to come by, and was the first release to have a 5.1 Dolby Digital soundtrack. It also has the extras generated for that release and is the most technically advanced version on LD. It doesn't pop up that often, and so you can usually expect to pay $30 to $50 for that set. And they had it at a good $29.99 price for anyone who needed it. But that meant they had essentially the rarest and most expensive version of Close Encounters on the Laserdisc format, priced less than arguably the worst version of Close Encounters on the Laserdisc format. That's also a notorious Rodder, and I bet if you opened that copy up, it would have disc rot on it, because it's pretty much a given with that version of the film. So you really had to dig through everything, and even though the vast majority of things were actually 99 cents, astonishingly, there were still some things I would have loved to have gotten, but the pricing was a bit extreme. But for the most part, everything was about what it should be, and most of the standard titles were 99 cents. So I got way too much. And keep in mind, this was me exercising restraint, but it wasn't all at once, but it still meant I had to go to the counter on 2 different visits with a ton of LDs and then figure out, how am I going to get these to my car? How am I going to get these out of my car? Where am I going to put all of these? And the usual sort of collector's self-conversation of trying to rationalize why they have just purchased a whole bunch of new to them Laserdisc titles that they didn't know they needed, but at least they were titles on my Laserdisc database wish list and things I was interested in checking out. I could have bought more because there were a ton of discs, as you can see in the images I've attached. It's the most Laserdiscs I've seen in a single store at one time since the last time I've seen a large collection traded in, which was well over at least 10 years ago. So it's been an exceptionally long time since I've seen this many discs in one store at one time. And it rarely happens in this day and age unless somebody trades in their collection. That's how you know. It's usually somebody trades in most of their collection, they decide to get out of the hobby, or the more unfortunate part is it's also usually an estate sale where some collector has unfortunately passed away and the family and relatives are parting out things, and then usually we'll take all the physical media items to a local store, and that's usually when you see a whole bunch of LDs. So it's usually one of those, but it happens every once in a while. But this was a ton of LDs to go through. What also made this a bit weird in a way is that I recognize some of these discs. Either they were ones I had passed on and Ron picked them up for himself, or they were ones he beat me to in terms of the local stores, or they were ones I actually saw him purchase when we would run into each other every once in a while. So I will start with all of the television and TV related discs, because he was a big collector of different television shows on Laserdisc, so I picked up some interesting ones. All of these are in pretty much immaculate shape. Some of them still have a plastic sleeve to go along with them, and all of them were astoundingly 99 cents. So to start, I picked up the Universal release or sampler from Alfred Hitchcock Presents, which brings together 4 classic episodes with this nice jacket artwork of the classic profile, and then the typical MCA Universal rear, so it's as expected. The episodes, of course, only have analog audio, so this was before Universal was doing digital PCM, but I'm just curious about the transfer quality, and I'm going to compare them to the DVD releases. And the series still has never gotten a complete release here in the US because Universal sucks. They only did most of the show on DVD, and there's been no sign of a Blu-ray upgrade. The later seasons did actually come out overseas, but in the PAL format, so you can get the whole series, but you have to mix and match. But only certain episodes came out on Laserdisc and VHS tape. What's notable about this release is that the 4 episodes they selected are 4 of the ones that were directed by Hitchcock himself. So the Hitchcock directed episodes are obviously the most important for study in terms of the whole series, and most people forget he actually did direct some of the episodes instead of just always doing the famous bookends for each show. So there's a handful of shows he directed for the series, and 4 of them were brought together into this sampler Laserdisc in the late 80s. They had several volumes of the Image Laserdisc releases of episodes from the classic Fugitive series. So here's volume 1. They all had this same design type, but they would change up the colors for each volume, and it was advertised under the Collector's Anthology series title. So each of these would give you 2 classic episodes with the digital PCM soundtrack, and that's what I'm really curious about, is to look at the transfer quality, and I've been meaning to get the complete series DVD set, so I will be curious to compare these transfers and audio tracks to the same episodes on the DVD version. And here's Volume 3 with the same art and overall design, but now going for brown on the top, and on the rear, which is otherwise the same cover design, 2 more episodes with digital PCM soundtracks. And then here's Volume 4, which goes for a green color on top. And then 2 more episodes also with digital soundtracks. This is still an outstanding shape. The only issue is that there was a punch out in the top corner that wasn't really gone through all the way. But it's still perfectly fine. And I don't know how well this will come across, but these jackets have a very thick gloss finish on them. So even though it's the same cover image every time, they do actually look quite nice. Image also did a handful of Lone Ranger releases. So this is volume 3 of the classic series, still in the original shrink wrap, so the jacket is in perfect shape. It is still Image, so you can still recognize their jacket design, but this is a lot spiffier than usual for them because they did try to keep to the Lone Ranger aesthetic and give it at least a little bit of style, and on a silver background, so it stands out. This gives you 4 episodes of the classic series, I believe all from the black and white years, with digital PCM soundtracks, so it'll be interesting to compare this to the DVD releases. Unfortunately, this show has never been released in its entirety on physical media. The later seasons are floating around online or sometimes shown on syndication, usually in rather rough quality. So hopefully someday the whole series can be restored and presented on at least DVD, if not Blu-ray, but I think there's still some rights issues dealing with the later seasons. Then, in one fell swoop, I was able to pick up all of the US releases of Mission Impossible on Laserdisc. Paramount, through Pioneer, released 6 volumes of standalone Laserdisc releases of different episodes. So they all have this sort of matching design with a different color for each. Each one brings together two completely different and separate episodes from different parts of the series. So they're kind of random selections, but it's still a quite nice thing to have as a fan of the series, and they only did 6 of them. And amazingly, in this collection, all 6 were there, and all 6 were only 99 cents each. These rarely pop up, and when they do, it's usually just 1 or 2 of them. They all continue the design on the back with all of the series iconography. You've even got a mission file with the chapter stops for each episode, and of course the classic match lighting the fuse on the bottom. These should be solid transfers, and they do have digital PCM soundtracks, but they predate the DVD restoration project, so it'll be interesting to compare these to that. And of course the series did get a Blu-ray release from Paramount, but they seem to have just reused the HD masters generated for DVD, and they only had audio remixes, none of the DVD sets extras, and one of the worst packaging designs in the history of home media. And that set is now out of print, going for silly money, so there is still no definitive release of the series to this day. Here's Volume 2. Again, same art, same style, just a different color to distinguish the different volumes. And then here's the rear, again with the really cool series aesthetic. Then here's Volume 3, which goes for a purple color. And this one is giving you 2 consecutive episodes because this was a 2-parter. So at least some of these did have consecutive episodes on them. Then here's Volume 4 on a green background with episodes 51 and 60. Here's Volume 5 on a sort of pink, purple, almost fuchsia background. And this has episodes 62 and 67. And then the final volume, Volume 6, is another with consecutive episodes because it was a 2-parter. So these are really, really nice. It's just a shame that they weren't doing the episodes in order and they didn't do the whole series. There were some Japanese releases of the show, and you can piece together most of the series on LD if you're determined to, but the best way to watch the series is still pretty much the DVD sets, which did do the whole series, and that's also how you get the whole series with the original mono sound mixes. But in order to get all of the supplements, you have to get the long out of print deluxe box set where everything came in the silly dynamite stick packaging, which was not protective of the discs themselves, and that set was expensive and then went out of print, so you typically are stuck having to just get the DVDs themselves for not too much money, and then if you're really determined to get all the DVD extras, you have to get that dynamite set on eBay and still pay quite a bit. Surprisingly, they also had one of the releases of episodes from The Prisoner. So this is Volume 4 featuring episodes 7 and 8 on a really striking jacket that has super thick gloss in terms of the finish. So this is a really impressive jacket, and it's a nice display piece if you're a fan of the show. My real interest, of course, is looking at the transfer quality, and this has lossless PCM soundtracks for each episode, so I'd like to compare this to other releases of the series. This is still a disc release from Image, but as you can see, somebody really put a ton of effort into designing these jackets for the series. But these are definitely things that don't pop up often, so I snapped this up immediately because I've always been curious about the transfers on these. Image also released some volumes of The Streets of San Francisco. So this is Volume 1 in rather nice shape. It does have a little bit of a corner punch through it, but still, it looks pretty nice. It's in solid condition. And of course, it's giving you 2 different episodes with some notable guest stars, each with PCM digital soundtracks. So it'll be nice to check this out, and I've meant to get the series collection on DVD, so when I do, I'll be able to compare the Laserdisc with that. But still, for Image doing television series, you know, they did put a little bit more effort into the design of these. The big thing is that on this, they actually have the Golden Gate Bridge in the background, and so it at least looks like they put in a bit more effort compared to their usual ultra-generic jackets. And then last for TV series, in this collection trade-in, there were a ton of mint condition, perfect shape Star Trek releases in terms of the original series releases, with 2 episodes each taken from various syndication masters and masters of the era. So these are the sort of warts and all transfers, more akin to what people would have seen on television in syndication. So they don't have any of the modern remastering efforts, and the LDs only have analog sound. In Japan, they got much fancier box sets, which did add digital sound, but as far as I know, they were primarily using these same masters. But in any case, whichever version you get, US LDs, Japanese LDs, or the US releases on VHS with hi-fi, that's how you get versions of the original series without the modern remastering efforts. And if you grew up with the series looking and sounding a certain way, these will very much give you that nostalgic feel. Plus, for a long time, I've wanted to dig further into the history of Star Trek on home video and try to see if there's a better source for the original mono soundtracks for all the episodes, because as good as the Blu-rays are in terms of getting most of the mono tracks on there, there are some quirks and things, so I've been curious to see if there's a better version out there. And the Blu-rays themselves for the original versions are a mess of old transfer issues, and they were hit with a ton of digital noise reduction, and they're not what they should be, and the series has been overdue for a complete 4K restoration for years upon years now, but Paramount and CBS are seemingly never going to get around to it. They'll just reissue those same discs over and over. So I've always been curious about the series on LD, but I never expected to stumble across a whole stack of episodes in mint shape for less than $1 each. So the episodes are not in consecutive order on these, and also you have to worry about production order versus air date order. So these are basically just loosely organized. So the first one is the pairing of Cat's Paw with the Doomsday Machine. All the discs have the same uniform art, showing the transporter room with images from each episode being transported on, which is a really nice design, and I think this has become iconic among fans. It's a nice, classy look. And it was also used for the VHS releases, but of course those would just have one episode and this image. You get the credits and synopsis of each episode with some nice images, and they do nicely give you the episode number, but of course you do have to keep in mind you will have to jump around sometimes to go through chronologically. Here's iMud paired with Metamorphosis, and this disc was actually still sealed, so this has never been opened, and astoundingly this was only 99 cents. Even though these are earlier Paramount discs from the late 80s, before they had spiffier jackets, there's just something really simple and classy about these that I really like in terms of their artwork and design. The only real issue here is that they don't have digital sound, so you're still stuck with Laserdisc analog. So if you want the best sound quality, you will have to get either the VHS release of these same episode masters, or you have to pay more for the Japanese LD box sets. Here's Journey to Babel paired with Friday's Child, and again, the condition on these was really fantastic. Some are still in the shrink wrap like this one, some are still sealed, and pretty much all of them already had LP sleeves in terms of the protective covers. So again, the design is uniform across all of these. Here's Who Mourns for Adonis paired with The Changeling, which of course is the episode that predates similar plot elements in Star Trek the Motion Picture. Then the same design for the rear cover. And then they paired Wolf in the Fold with the classic Trouble with Tribbles. And not only is this in excellent shape, but astoundingly, this one was also sealed and also only 99 cents. Here's Mirror Mirror paired with the Apple. Again, this one was also sealed, so the condition on these is as good as it gets. Absolutely perfect, still sealed, and astoundingly 99 cents. Here's Obsession paired with The Deadly Years, again with the same uniform back cover. Here's The Immunity Syndrome with A Private Little War, and this one was also sealed. I told you that the condition on these was astounding. I knew that he had collected the whole original series and had spent a lot of time trying to get every single episode release in good shape, so I think this was just all of his spares, really. Here's By Any Other Name with the Omega Glory and the lovely rear cover. This one is also sealed. 99 cents. sealed LDs for 99 cents can happen. Here's Return to Tomorrow with Patterns of Force, the same rear cover design. Here's The Ultimate Computer paired with Bread and Circuses, and the rear cover is in great shape because this copy was also sealed. You see why I bought so many now. Here's Spectre of the Gun with Day of the Dove. Nice images. And this LD was also sealed. I'm starting to sound like a broken record, I know, but I couldn't believe that not only were there so many TOS discs for less than $1 each, but a good chunk of them had never been opened. That's why I bought all of them. Here's the Enterprise incident with the Paradise Syndrome. Some nice images on the rear. And The Children Shall Lead paired with Is There in Truth No Beauty? Some nice images chosen for the back, and it has a nice vintage feel to it. Here's the Empath with Elan of Troyes, and this copy was also sealed, so it's in perfect shape. And then the final episode, Turnabout Intruder, which gets its own LD because it was the only one left, so that's why it's got 2 images from the episode on the jacket. Similarly, you've got more images from the single episode on the rear because there's just the 1 episode on here. What have I done? What have I done? Now to go through standard titles going chronologically by release year. First is a really nice example of one of the Republic special editions in terms of spiffier gatefold jackets and new transfers, but usually with some sort of printed pack-in. So this is the 1947 classic Western Angel and the Bad Man, which has seen a variety of different transfers and releases as it's gone, I think, quasi-public domain, or the rights have sort of gone into that legal gray area. So there are a number of just dodgy versions of this floating around. So I'm really curious to check out the transfer here. Plus it has a digital PCM lossless soundtrack. But you've got the lovely Republic gatefold with a fantastic reproduction of an original half-sheet poster across most of the gatefold, plus some really nice text about the film with some more production images. And then the rear is in the style that Republic did for all of these releases, which are usually tied to an anniversary year for a film. And all these black and gold jackets are actually embossed, so when you hold this in the light, the gold will actually jump out because it's specially printed. Same thing for the credits on the front, and they're all branded as collector's editions, but it's really just the collectible packaging. And the printed material here, it says it's just a reproduction of the lobby card, but when Republic included printed materials in these releases, whether they were posters or lobby cards, they really made sure the quality of the reproduction was well done. So here is the lobby card reproduction, and it's full size. I mean, I don't know how well it translates on camera, but this is full size. It's given a whole pocket of the gatefold, and the reproduction quality and the color, the printing, it's exceptionally well done. So if you're a fan of any Republic films, it's really nice to pick up a complete version of one of these anniversary releases if they exist, because the jackets are really nice, but usually they came with a really nice bit of printed material that was well done. So these make wonderful display pieces as well. So I'm really curious to check out the transfer in audio on this because I'm going to compare it to the other version I have, which is the old DVD from the Roan group. So this has a variety of different releases, but I've never been sure which is technically the best one in terms of transfer and audio. And also keep in mind, these LDs that I'm continuing to go over were also just 99 cents. So I went a bit overboard, I will admit, but I did exercise some restraint because I could have bought everything, and that would have just been madness. I mean, this is already kind of madness, but I at least tried to get things that I knew I wanted to have in my collection or could dig into their transfer information. So next is 1948's Connecticut Yankee and King Arthur's Court, classic Bing Crosby vehicle from Universal as part of their Encore Edition series. This jacket's in perfect shape except for a corner punch in the top corner. It's still got the original gloss finish. It's held up pretty well. It just has a little bit of seam splitting and spine wear right there, but other than that, it's perfect. But why I wanted to get this is this was when they started adding digital soundtracks. So every Universal or Encore disc, you have to scrutinize and look all over the cover. Sometimes they wouldn't actually print it on the cover, but usually when they started adding digital sound, they would. So right there in the upper corner, you see the digital sound logo. So that means this is a Encore disc with a PCM mono soundtrack. There's also a little logo on the front as well. So these can be tricky. Most of them are analog audio only, but they did start adding digital sound here and there. And if you look at the chapters, strangely enough, for an Encore disc, it's more than just one chapter. Universal would famously just give you one chapter to go to the end of the film on side 2, usually where they would put the trailer, and that was your chapter. But here they've given it a number of chapters so you can go directly to the actual songs and music pieces in the film. I think that's probably the only reason why it got multiple chapters, because Universal was very stingy with the chapters they would give you. Next is one of the underrated classic live-action films in the Disney catalog, and that's the story of Robin Hood, which is actually one of the better Robin Hood films, and it has absolutely gorgeous color photography. This is part of the Disney Studio film collection they were doing in the early to mid 1990s for a lot more of their obscure live action films. So they all had this type of cover design aesthetic. Here, Robin Hood, of course, has a green cover as befitting Sherwood Forest. A nice image of Richard Todd as Robin Hood there. The rear is in the same design aesthetic. These were typically new transfers done as part of this series, and some films would have supplements, but usually not unless they were a deluxe box set or part of the archive collection. This was getting a lot more Disney titles, a spiffier release, and it was obviously aimed a bit more at collectors, but these also had digital soundtracks. Most of the time, as I believe here, it's the original mono mix, but Disney was at this time also doing a lot of fake stereo or stereoizing of mono tracks, so you always have to double check the audio and see if it's the original mono or not. But I really do enjoy this film. It's one of my favorite Disney live action films, and I think one of the best Robin Hood films to this day. So I was always curious to pick it up on LD and compare it to other versions. This still really needs a modern restoration and Blu-ray or UHD release, but Disney live action material unfortunately does not typically get that type of love and care. Then they had the Paramount remastered LD of the classic Houdini with Tony Curtis playing the famous magician. This is the 1953 biopic that was produced by George Powell, and the artwork for the cover looks really striking because it's used for the entirety of the jacket. Otherwise, it's got all the 90s Paramount signifiers, like having the Laserdisc logo in the upper corner. This being a 1953 film, it predates the widescreen era, so it's, of course, Academy ratio. There are some nice images on the back, but otherwise it's a standard Paramount rear cover for the time. This does have a PCM digital soundtrack, which I believe should be mono. I don't think this film ever had a stereo mix, but this was just one of those films that seemed to always be playing somewhere on cable when I was growing up, so I saw it many, many times, even though it does dramatize quite a bit of Houdini's life, and of course it's not exactly what happened, so it does take quite a bit of dramatic license, but I do have a certain level of fondness for this because I saw it a number of times growing up, and so I was just curious to get the LD and check out the transfer, and this is in pretty much perfect shape. Next is a LumaVision special edition or a more deluxe release of the 1956 film The Brave One, which is really important because it was a major breakthrough in terms of Dalton Trumbo starting to get more industry recognition again during getting closer towards the tail end of the Blacklist years. So this was still a couple years before he was credited as the writer of both Spartacus and Exodus in 1960, but it is still a major breakthrough. And this is a lovely jacket from LumaVision, who is really promoting this as a new transfer of the audio mix with gorgeous original artwork, and of course promoting that this was a CinemaScope title. There's a ton of liner notes on the back giving you full historical background about the film, and there's also a really nice bit of technical information letting you know that this was transferred from a pristine British IB Technicolor release print, and then the audio was transferred and remixed from the original 4-track magnetic stereo, and they also had an optical mono track and the original music and effects track, which is included on the analog tracks as well. So this is one of those LDs where you get the isolated music and effects on the analog track, in addition to the new restored stereo version on the digital tracks. I really love what they did with this jacket. It's really striking for just still being a single disc jacket without a gatefold. So this is one of those LumaVision releases that's really more of a deluxe special edition in terms of a film with a new transfer and restoration and also some really nice printed information, but it's just sold as a standard release. Also from 1956, they had the beautiful Pioneer Special Edition release of the classic Picnic, which was a brand new widescreen transfer, new remastering process, and a new transfer of the original stereo mix, which is here as digital PCM. The Pioneer Special Edition line is a really nice line to try and collect because they all had these beautiful matching jackets for the most part. And here on Picnic, the art just really jumps off the jacket, especially due to the colors used. So this is also another lovely display piece. The rear cover is much more straightforward, but keeping in the same design aesthetic as the rest of this series. You get the film in widescreen for the first time on a single CLV disc with a digital PCM soundtrack of the new transfer of the stereo mix. So this film has been restored and revisited a number of times, so this obviously is outdated compared to those, but I've just been curious about some of the different transfers, and anytime I find a Pioneer Special Edition disc, I try to pick them up if they're cheap enough because I just like collecting the different ones. But in addition to that, this jacket and this artwork is just fantastic. Next is another classic film with Kim Novak, and that's 1958's Bell Book and Candle, which is the famous reteaming of Novak with Jimmy Stewart in the same release year as Vertigo. Now, this is, of course, the old Image LD. It obviously is an old transfer, not in the original aspect ratio, but it does have digital sound. And even though these old Image LDs are not the best quality, sometimes they wind up having really good soundtracks. So with films I like or films I'm interested in, anytime I stumbled across one for cheap, then I try to pick it up just to be able to look at the transfer and check the soundtrack. This is otherwise the usual Image design, and obviously they've designed the artwork for a VHS release and just slightly repurposed it to slap on their generic Laserdisc jacket design. Next is 1960's Sink the Bismarck, which was directed by Louis Gilbert. This is a spiffier release from Fox and their classic widescreen edition cover design. You've got a nice mixture of black and white images with some bold color, but this is a later release, as you can tell from it having the Fox video on the front cover instead of the old CBS Fox logo. This has digital sound, and it is a matrix stereo track because this was a CinemaScope film, and so it seems to have had a 4-track magnetic soundtrack on the original release. But this has a substantial gatefold with tons of liner notes running both panels and some really striking imagery. So this is one of the more deluxe Fox releases for sure. It's deceptive though because the front cover just looks like one of their standard widescreen releases. On the rear cover, Fox would usually go for their standard gray, and by this point in the early 1990s, sometimes they would go for a color like usually pink or green or blue, but to continue the front cover aesthetic and how this release is definitely a bit spiffier, they went for bold red, and this looks fantastic. It looks so good. I wish they had done more like this, and red still looks good on physical media releases today, so I just had to highlight this because it's atypical for Fox, even though it's their same sort of design, but it just looks great. You've still got extensive liner notes and information about the historical background of the film, and then you have the cast and crew, with the film being a single CLV disc in widescreen on two sides, with the Matrix stereo track as digital PCM. Otherwise, it's the traditional Fox layout, which has been a bit modernized by this point in the early 90s. Next is the 1961 classic The Innocents in the remastered Fox widescreen edition from later in the 1990s when they had updated to their new style of having the Searchlight logo on the top. This has really nice cover artwork, and nicely they kept it black and white for such an iconic black and white film. This is a very glossy jacket, and so it's also very thin, which is why this unfortunately has some wear, and the bottom seam has split, so the disc and the sleeve is unfortunately poking out a little bit. Otherwise, this is in perfectly fine shape. You just have to deal with some of the spine wear, but that's mostly because this is such a thin jacket to begin with. But the rear cover is just stunning, showing off more of the incredible visuals of the film. You get the typical large amount of liner notes from a Fox release, and then you've got the modernized version of the credit layout at the bottom. The film is on a single CLV disc in widescreen with the original mono mix as digital PCM, and nicely, even the Fox Home Entertainment logo has been rendered in black and white, so there is no color on this jacket at all, which is a really nice touch. The jacket on this is a little beat up, but I've always wanted to get this to look at the transfer and the audio track, and this is a disc that doesn't pop up very often, so I was okay getting it in this condition, which is still mostly pretty good for only 99 cents. Next is 1964's The World of Henry Orient, which is one of the underrated 1960s Peter Sellers vehicles. This was also directed by the great George Roy Hill and is here in the MGM letterbox reissue with nice artwork that is nicely using most of the LD jacket space, although it would have been also used for VHS. The rear is the typical MGM style of this time, still having the gold bar on the top, and then using a mixture of tinted stills and also an original poster in the corner with the general information that's obviously taken from the VHS artwork dimensions. But this is getting you the film in widescreen for the first time with a digital PCM mono soundtrack, so it'll be interesting to revisit this film on the LD release. Next is the 1969 film Journey to the Far Side of the Sun in the Universal Letterbox standard jacket design. This is, of course, the science fiction film from Jerry Anderson coming out after 2001: A Space Odyssey. The artwork's pretty solid, although I would always prefer original poster artwork instead. It's in the usual Universal Letterbox design, so you've got the starry background. This is in perfect shape, except there's a little bit of a tear on the top corner, but otherwise it's perfectly fine, and the rear is in perfect shape. As usual, Universal gives you a healthy amount of information in terms of liner notes, and then the chapter stops where you get the film on a single CLV disc with a digital soundtrack. I presume this is mono, but I'm not 100% sure, and it does include the original trailer at the end. Next is the first MGM Letterbox release of Brainstorm. This is the 1991 Letterbox version. Of course, later on, MGM did a much fancier version with a spiffed up technical presentation, but I was always curious about comparing the two versions, and of course, the film famously used Douglas Trumbull's show scan process and changed aspect ratios, so there is quite a bit of intricate picture and sound mixing going on in terms of the different formats. So I was just curious to compare the different transfers, so when this popped up for cheap, plus it has the nice artwork on the jacket, well, I couldn't resist. The rear is the usual MGM style for this time, although you get a healthier selection of images on the side than you usually do for an MGM jacket at this time, and the background is a nice sort of dark purple, which makes the text nicely readable. This gives you a letterbox transfer for the first time, although it's not as spiffy as the later, much harder to find reissue Laserdisc, and it gives you a matrix stereo digital PCM track, which presumably is the film's general Dolby Stereo mix. So again, I just got this because I was curious to compare the transfers. Next is the 1991 film The Hard Way. which was directed by John Badham. This in the universal standard letterbox design aesthetic, but with the original poster artwork. So it looks pretty nice on an LD jacket. The rear is very straightforward, obviously reworking what was done for VHS, but this gives you a letterbox transfer with the Dolby Stereo mix as digital PCM. I've been wanting to revisit this film for quite some time, as it is very underrated, and so I was just looking to hopefully pick up the LD at some point, because I do enjoy looking at 80s and 90s films on LD, especially if I haven't seen them in a long time. Next is 1993's film adaptation of Madame Butterfly, which was of course directed by David Cronenberg. I really wanted to see this because I'm a big fan of John Lone for his performances in The Shadow and Year of the Dragon, and he only did a handful of films, and this is one of his most famous roles. This is something that doesn't pop up too often on LD, but it's not particularly very expensive either, but this was in perfect shape, and the jacket is quite nice, especially considering this is a Warner release, and their jackets were usually pretty plain. The rear is the usual Warner sort of style, but on a nice, rich red background. You get the chapter stops with the film on single CLV disc, and of course the widescreen indicator on the bottom, and this has the Dolby Stereo mix as digital PCM. Interestingly, there's a note that Cronenberg supervised this transfer, and it gives you the intended 1.75 to 1 ratio, which is of course more of a European standard, as in the US films were always shown at 1.85 to 1. Typically directors were not credited, or there wasn't a director supervised note on an LD, so whenever you see one, especially on a studio release like a Warner disc, that definitely means the transfer was director supervised, or it was stipulated it had to be a certain way or up to a certain quality level. This is one of the only Warner LDs I know of where the director is specifically credited and there's some technical information on the back. I can only think of a few, like the release of Gremlins that mentions Joe Dante specifically, so that was another reason why I wanted to pick this up, so I couldn't resist at the 99-cent price. Also from 93 is 6 Degrees of Separation on this nice MGM letterbox release with the original artwork, a nice condition jacket, and then a solid rear cover for MGM. You can tell they were starting to improve or tweak their designs, but you can still recognize it's an MGM disc. This is, of course, the film on a single CLV disc with a Dolby Stereo track as digital PCM, and it does include the original trailer, but no other supplements. But still, this is a film I've wanted to revisit, so I couldn't resist a cheap, nice condition LD copy. Next, from 1994, is the Fox release of Bad Girls and the widescreen extended version. So this is a film I've never actually gotten to see, so I couldn't resist picking up an extended version on LD. It's very much, or was clearly designed, it seems, to be an all-female version of films like Young Guns, even down to having similar artwork for the poster campaign. But it wasn't often that films actually got extended cuts at this time on LD. It happened every once in a while, so I think it's really interesting to look at extended versions on LD when they did happen. It's a Fox release, so you get the nice amount of liner notes. You get the film on a single CLV disc, and interestingly, it looks like there's an original featurette or making a promo included after the film. It does indicate, though, on the jacket that this includes footage not included in the R-rated version, so this is an unrated cut. It does have the Dolby Stereo mix as digital PCM, and the artwork is pretty nice, plus it's a Fox jacket, so it's got a nice gloss finish. Another Western from 1994 is Texas, which is a big 3-hour miniseries that I've read about but never actually seen, so I figured I would pick it up on LD because why not? It also has, of course, beautiful artwork. The jacket's got some wear, but this is a longer release, so of course it's going to have tons of chapter stops, and it does have a digital soundtrack, which I believe would be stereo with perhaps matrix encoding as well. So I figured it would be fun to watch this miniseries on LD, as it's another of the Western miniseries of the early 90s that was coming out in the wake of the success of Lonesome Dove, and I enjoy watching that series on LD, so I figured I would watch this on LD. And then finally for this section, I have two late releases or later releases of 1997 films. This first one is one I've always wanted to find. It does not pop up often, and it's a later Warner film pressed by Image. And that's the 1997 film Money Talks, which of course is Chris Tucker being directed by Brett Ratner, but here he's paired with Charlie Sheen in a film that is basically the rough draft for Rush Hour. So if you like the Rush Hour films and you've never seen Money Talks, it's basically the first version or attempt at a Rush Hour type buddy comedy with Chris Tucker. This is the original poster artwork on a nice jacket with thick gloss. Of course, all late releases from Warner pressed by Image have nice glossy jackets, and of course, very thin cardstock, so it's hard to find these in good shape without seam splitting, so this was a really surprising find at 99 cents. The only thing you'll notice if you're looking at the jacket closely, you see that here on the side where it looks like maybe the disc sleeve is sticking out, that's actually the jacket. So apparently when this was made, there was some runoff or the sizing wasn't done just right. So on the very far edge, it's basically blank. So I just found that kind of amusing and perhaps another sign that it's a late release when they weren't paying as much attention to LDs. The rear cover looks pretty nice and of course is repurposing what was used for VHS, but it looks fancier across an LD jacket. You get the film on two sides as a single CLV disc in widescreen with Dolby Surround, Matrix PCM, and Dolby Digital AC3 5.1. It's also got the teaser and theatrical trailer, so that's nice, but that's all you get for extras. This is a rather uncommon disc like most later Warner releases, so anytime you find a Warner disc pressed by Image from the last couple years of LD, it's a really nice pickup, and you certainly don't stumble across them for 99 cents. The other thing is that later discs typically have state-of-the-art transfers for the time, so it'll be fun to compare this against the old DVD and see how it stacks up, because usually most late release LDs are actually arguably better or significantly better than their DVD counterparts, which would be early DVDs. And then last is another 1997 Warner release, but this time it seems like they pressed it themselves, and that is Rosewood, which is a John Singleton film I've never gotten to see, so I figured I would try it on LD. The jacket artwork is quite striking because it uses the whole jacket, and you've got the widescreen logo in the bottom corner. But because it's a later release, the actual cardstock is quite thin, and it's a 2-disc set that isn't a gatefold. So that means you do have some wear, but it's actually held together pretty well. There's also a really thick gloss on this jacket, so it looks really nice in the hands. You can tell it's a Warner disc because you've still got the overall design aesthetics where they've just extended what would have been on VHS and then put the chapter stops on the side. The film is spread over 3 sides, all CLV, and has Dolby Stereo Matrix on the digital tracks and has the original 5.1 mix as Dolby Digital AC3 on the analog right, which you would decode with an RF demodulator. So this looks like it'll be a nice late 90s Warner transfer from the last couple years of LD and should look pretty good and should sound great. So I figured I would watch this film for the first time on this LD because it's not a super common title, but it is one that Warner held on to themselves instead of handing it off to Image Entertainment. I picked up so many Laserdiscs that I think I'm going to split this into 2 different videos. So I will end this section here and then pick up in the next video with the series releases, favorite directors, and box sets, as I even picked up a number of box sets in this collection. So this was a fantastic number of finds, all for actually very little money considering what these typically go for. So I'm of course very thankful that this collection was traded in so the rest of us local collectors could pick and choose and add to our own collections. And I'm glad the store decided to actually price most of these at about what they should be, or actually far less than what they should be. And I think that was simply because they had so many Laserdiscs traded in that they knew outside of us collectors, these were probably going to be there for a while. So I think they were trying to encourage more people to pick up titles. And I'm sure people beat me to the the punch on a number of LDs because by the time I got there had already been quite a few that were picked up. So I think most local Laserdisc collectors will be hitting up this store time and time again, and the overall collection trade-in will continue to dwindle down. So as always, I hope my babblings about Laserdisc collecting and physical media has been at least somewhat fun and informative. Hopefully you've seen something in this video you'd like to add to your own collection, or maybe this encourages you to dust something off the shelf that you haven't watched for a long time. In any event, it should be further proof that you never know when Laserdisc will pop up in your area. I had not seen anything new outside of one disc that I picked up, and then all of a sudden I see the store make a Facebook post and then see some posts in some of the local collectors groups and realize that all of a sudden there was going to be a massive influx of LDs at some of the local stores, and sure enough, it was a lot. So that's why I'm splitting this into 2 videos. So definitely keep enjoying the wonders of the Laserdisc format, keep your players going, keep your disc spinning, and thank you ever so much for watching.